I am Aritz Moreno, the director of Advantage of Traveling by Train, and you are listening the Last Pictures House.
Hello and welcome to The Last Picture House, the podcast that indulges your love for cinema. I'm your host, Marcus Lovett, and nursing me through my post-festival depression are regular panelists Iain, Did Someone Call for a Dr. Norton, and Maria, You May Feel Some Discomfort, Suzuki. This episode, part 2 of our Tokyo International Film Festival coverage. We'll discuss provocative Norwegian drama Disco, Japanese erotic mystery Tezuka's Barbara, then journey to the mountains of Azerbaijan for Old Men Never Die, and on to rural Turkey for Food for a Funeral. After that, 2 movies with a strong social critique, Iranian crime drama Just 6.5, and Italian coming-of-age film Nevia. Finally, we'll discuss satire in Taika Waititi's World War II fantasy Jojo Rabbit, and get lost in the wildly inventive advantages of traveling by train. And if you like the show, hit that subscribe button. Review us on iTunes. These shows don't review themselves. Also, impress Maria by following us on Twitter, @LastPigHouse. There you'll find trailers, trivia, and tantrums. So last time on the show we talked about how the festival is structured. My question this time is, did the festival give space to new voices? Maria?
Well, I think so, because there are a lot of first-time feature films of directors that may be more active doing short films and debuted in this competition with long films. Or also what I notice is there are a lot of young actors really debuting as professional actors in these movies or being like protagonists for the first time. So I think you could enjoy a lot of new voices, new faces in this festival.
And I think we saw that with the grand prize winner, Uncle, because it was the lead actress's first film. And of course, it was her uncle's first time being involved in the industry at all.
Yeah, and then it wins Grand Prix.
And even for a film we're going to talk about later tonight, Jojo Rabbit, that was the first time actor playing the lead role in that as well. So I thought we saw a lot of new, especially as you were saying, Maria, a lot of new faces.
And where does the festival sit within the broader spectrum of international film festivals, Maria?
I think in terms of relationship with other important international festivals, Tokyo has a special line with Venice Film Festival. So we see a lot of the films that we read about or we heard about in Tokyo. And another thing is obviously being in Asia, there's a special attention for Asian films. So this year we saw a lot of things from Iran, from Mongolia, or from Indonesia. So I think that we get to see a lot of countries represented.
I also think this time, especially because we didn't have a big headline premiere, there wasn't a huge film premiering here, we got to see a lot of smaller films. Like we said, a lot of first-time directors, but a lot of things that perhaps got a lot more exposure because there wasn't a big film overshadowing everything.
Yeah. One of the challenges with this particular festival, like any big event here in Tokyo, is getting the word out. Telling people that there's an arts event on when at the same time there's the Rugby World Cup. It's very, very difficult. And I think the festival's done well this year in getting people to come to Roppongi and without a big headlining film.
I think I'd agree with that, Marcus. And like you said, because Tokyo is such a big city, there was actually other events that were part of the festival going on that were miles away. Like my wife and kid went to the Kids Cinema Festival in Futaka Tamagawa and did all these wonderful kids activities and stuff like that. It's great, but it was so far away from the rest of the festival that she said it really didn't feel that connected.
Even though officially it is one of the events under
the umbrella
of the festival.
As other films that play in Hibiya Midtown and other cinemas further afield, away from Roppongi, which is sort of the spiritual home of the festival. And it's a little bit disconnected. It's a bit hard to access those places if you're coming direct from Roppongi. So, yeah, it's a challenge to create that buzz, create that kind of community vibe.
It's Hibiya Midtown. That's why they did the Toy Story marathon, didn't they? They showed Toy Stories 1, 2, 3, and 4 for free.
At the Toho, yeah.
Yeah, at the Toho. I think 12 hours of Woody is enough for anybody.
You had to get that in there.
Yeah.
Hi, The Last Picture House. Un saluto carissimo da me, Nunzia De Stefano, regista di Nevia.
So first up, we're talking about Disco, the Norwegian film.
Now, Marcus, if you could put your disco pants on for me and give us a little bit of plot, that would be great.
I never take them off, Iain. 19-year-old Miriam is the stepdaughter of a charismatic pastor of an evangelical movement called The Freedom. As a world champion in disco freestyle dancing and leader of the youth group of the congregation, Miriam is the pride of the church. While defending her world title, she collapses on stage. This makes her start to question her faith, Her family's solution is for her to become a better believer. So the film has a very interesting structure in that it's shot like a documentary, and we follow this very isolated young woman. We don't see her at school. We see her, however, training for the performances she does,
At
the
the
so-called disco,
competitions,
the
so, yeah.
competitions, and we see her attending church, whether it is her stepfather's church, the Freedom, or other people's congregations. She seems to be really struggling with who she is. We know that something bad happened to her in her past. She asks her mother about it. The mother never comes forth with anything. She's like, look, it's not the right time. I can't tell you anything about it. So she's asking about her biological father. Miriam is really surrounded by people at all times, yet she never really has an opportunity to be part of a community, and that's what she seems to be seeking. Would you agree, Maria?
I thought that her competition winning persona and being this rising star is the face that she brings forward. So this is the layer that she relates herself to the family, to other people with. So, for example, we have this moment of unity in family when they're trying to post something on Instagram. You see them very animated and very kind of loving in these moments. And then you see complete, as you were saying, loneliness with her listening with her headphones on another preacher, an American preacher this time.
Another evangelical preacher.
Evangelical preacher preaching about how you can find yourself, find happiness through God and through correct way of life, or whatever they say in these American churches.
So it seems like she's in a very religious family. Is she finding escapism in this disco dancing? Because disco seems quite a contrast. It's quite a sexualized
They're
thing.
very uneasy bedfellows. When I watch the opening, which is this big performance with girls with teased hair, they're very young, they're wearing makeup and smearing on fake tan, it plays like a satire of that world. Essentially, you feel like they're being used. But then it makes perfect sense, because when you see these young children later in the film as part of different religious groups, you're forced to wonder whether or not they have autonomy about what their beliefs are, that they're being pushed, they're being spoon-fed something. The film, for me, is very much about indoctrination.
But, going back to your question, this is what I thought before seeing the movie, that the disco part would be kind of in contrast with the Christian thing. But actually, once you see it, the important thing is to excel, to be, as popular say now, inspirational. So in this way of being a champion, Miriam is kind of looked up to and bringing the Christian message. I think that is what it counts. That's why when she is not comfortable anymore, she's not winning anymore in her dancing competition, that's when you start losing her persona, her identity.
And she's questioning whether she's still got it.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because you're expecting people around her to question her, because she is that kind of hero of the church, and she is somebody that people obviously aspire to be. But we don't really see that. The criticism is coming from within. It's coming from her. It's a film about exploitation. It's a film about people searching for meaning and maybe not looking in the right places.
How are the performances in this?
Okay, the film's center is the performance of Josephine Frida Pettersen, who is this rising star. She became really, really famous in Norwegian TV series called Skam, about high school kids. The character that Josephine Frida Pettersen is playing, called Nora, so the rising of this name between new kids, new babies. She is so influential. So every one of these characters, these fictional characters, has their own like Facebook or social network. So it was really
people are named after.
Yeah. People are named, and she.
That's influential.
Yeah, because this series is trying to deal with all the problems of teenagers. So for her, this is the first time that she is trying something different from the series that run, I think, for 2 years, from 2015 to 17.
Here in Disco, it's a really great performance from Josephine Frida Pettersen. And there were so many kids in this film who just gave incredible performances. There's one kid in particular at the Catholic camp out in the woods of Norway, where she is talking about who she is and who she wants to be and being a better kid.
Yeah, it's almost like a confession to the community, and
Yeah.
it's so
It's so intimate and
heartbreaking, really.
yeah. Absolutely.
So this is a film about the evangelical church, but that's something I associate more with America. Like, I didn't really know of the concept of evangelical church in Norway.
Likewise, I had no idea that the evangelical church was such a big thing, but according to the director's Q&A, the director, Jorunn Myklebust Severson, she talked about how through her research, she was finding these stories that were really affecting, and she wanted to bring all of those stories into the script that she was writing. So the script is an amalgam of these different stories that she heard talking to people from different religious groups.
Marcus, you mentioned this is filmed more like a kind of documentary. What kind of visual style does the director adopt?
So the film starts out with this kind of intimate documentary style. We see Miriam close up, we see her with her familiars, her family. Then we gradually take a step back, see her on stage at the evangelical church. We see her interacting with different religious people. And towards the end, we start to actually see more of the context of what's going on around her. From the visual perspective, it's very intimate, and I felt like it was slowly giving us more and more of what's going on around her. But ironically, it's that she's becoming more and more isolated as the camera shows us more of what's going on.
It sounds like this would be a really interesting companion piece to Midsommar, which is the Swedish film.
Absolutely. You know why? Because this film is really a horror film. It's a slow burn horror where you see people making choices that they think are the right choices, but they're the wrong choices, and like any good horror film.
That's really interesting, because Midsommar is not a horror film, despite it being advertised as a horror film. It's more about a young woman dealing with the trauma of a kind of great tragedy that happens to her at the start of the film.
Disco feels like you're screaming, but nobody hears.
So moving from one competition film onto another, this time from Japan,
Yes.
we're talking about, is it Tezuka's Barbara or just Barbara, Maria?
In Japan is Barbora, which is
Barbora.
which tries to replicate the American pronunciation of Barbara. But in an international market, it's going to be called Tezuka's Barbara to remind its legacy to Osamu Tezuka, the master of Japanese manga.
So for those who don't know, who was Tezuka Osamu?
Basically, he is called the Walt Disney of Japan. So he is the father figure for Japanese manga and anime. People may know him from Astro Boy, the robot, the kid from the future.
Ah, my
Yes.
childhood. Dun, 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 dun.
Yeah.
So he's from Takadana Baba?
Yes.
from Baba,
Yeah.
Because that's the theme tune for the Yamanote.
Because he
is
lived
Astro
and
Boy.
worked there. Shall I give you the plot of Barbara? So famous and tormented novelist Yosuke Mikura, who is played by former boy band SMAP member Goro Inagaki, meets a mysterious drunk girl, Barbara, played by Fumi Nikaido, recently seen in Fly Me to Saitama, and Little Miss Period. Yes, it's what you think. It's in the cinemas now. It's a film about periods, yes.
I know this is an audio medium, but the look I just gave Maria.
Yes. I know. Well, we'll talk about that some other time. Anyway, he meets her on the street and decides to take her home. But then he develops an obsession for the girl, and the two then start a torrid affair. When they decide to marry, Barbara takes Yusuke to a bar to meet her mother, Mnemosyune, who makes him sign a contract and warns Yusuke that if he tells anyone about the marriage, he will lose Barbara forever. The day of the wedding, almost a satanic rite, the police burst in, and Barbara is taken away from her people. When Yusuke finds her disguised as a different girl, the two decide to elope and face their tragic fate.
Sorry, what? What is going on?
Okay, first of all, this is a live-action film of 1970s manga. So it's pretty bold
was
for
gonna say,
something written in the 70s.
That explains everything. I'm fine now.
And this has been considered for a long time non-filmable.
Big surprise there.
I was going to say, bloody sounds it.
And to direct it is Osamu's son, Makoto Tezuka, who is famous for kind of quirky films and animation. So he said that this was the perfect material for his kind of films, more than the things his father is known for, which are kid-friendly. The original manga, the original Barbara, deals with a lot of heavy material, from S&M to occultism to necrophilia.
I'm never going to look at Astro Boy the same way.
Right? That is what I felt too, because this gave me the occasion to flip through a little bit of the original manga. And this, I think it's really proof that the manga dimension allows you so much. So basically the main characters, Barbara, is as cute as a female Astro Boy. So big eyes, cutesy flip of her hair, and she does some horrible things. But this is all plausible, all kind of realistic in the manga.
I've got so many mental images.
Yeah, I'm interested in this whole kind of like wholesome versus. Okay, so the point of view that I had watching like the Astro Boy cartoons when I was a kid is that it's a very wholesome thing. Now, was that because it was cleaned up by the American censors or the American studios rather, or is it that Tezuka's work always had this kind of underlying sense of
Tezuka's world
something else?
is, on the surface, very innocent, but also has a little bit of sexiness always. I'm referring to manga for girls that's called Ribon no Kishi, which is like a princess disguised as a prince, disguised as a knight. So we have a lot of like kind of risque transformation where you can kind of peek something, see. So there's always an underlining sexiness in his works that I don't know if like abroad has been cleaned up, has been cut, because I have seen in Japan this manga or anime. But in this manga, I think that his dark side is all up front.
I think that's a really interesting point. Just to give a callback to one of our previous episodes with Stefan, he talked about how a lot of Japanese manga came to France and it wasn't censored, it was just translated into French. And that's where my view of Astro Boy is kind of odd, because my father would read us the French Astro Boy, and then when it came to Britain, it was completely different. All that was sanitized. There was no hint of
Yeah, and I'm
this.
guessing that I saw the same one, the sanitized version.
So Barbara was never put into anime. It's always stayed on the paper as manga. And this is the first time that it was put into a film. And I think honestly that it could have been better to go for an animation, and especially thinking that Makoto Tezuka has done animation instead of trying a live action thing from an environment that is clearly TV-like.
Who's in this?
The main guy, Yosuke, is Goro Inagaki, who is from boy band SMAP.
Famous for their acting ability, Smap Smap.
Famous for being able to do everything,
Ver-
but not excelling in any.
Oh, no,
From singing to acting to dancing.
Jack of all trades, master of none.
They're very
Yes.
good chefs. And that's about all I'll give. That-
So they're performing here in Japanese TV, doing a cooking show.
well, no, they
Well,
cook.
they used to, I think. Are
And
they
they've
still
stopped
on?
now, yeah, they're broken up. They cook, and then for some unexplainable reason, they then go and sing, and I wish they'd stayed cooking. And then they do these comedy skits, which I wish they'd stayed cooking. And then they sing again, and no, then they dance, and I wish they'd stayed cooking. So how?
I guess that's what I felt too when I saw the movie. It's like, please resume cooking some omelet or something. He is trying to be this cool, I'm wearing like shades 24 hours, but it's clearly can hit the dark notes.
So is he miscast? I mean, is it he's playing the role of the directions kind of off? What's your thought?
Because he's an odd choice as a cast.
He is playing a cool guy, as probably he thinks is a cool guy. So we don't get any of the obsession, the dark side of the character. Let me give you an example. So there's one scene where he is lured by a woman that says she is his fan of his novels, and she takes him to the fitting room, and they start having sex. And then Barbara arrives, and she smashes her.
What hits her?
Because we find out that she was a mannequin, and Yusuke's obsession was seeing her as a woman.
Okay.
But this is something that I understood reading about Barbara the manga afterwards, because if you see the film, when Barbara breaks this woman, it's almost like an android. So it makes you think that there's some kind of android robo thing going on. And you don't understand that it's all the obsession inside the mind of Yusuke.
So you're making this film sound great. I really want to see
Actually,
it now.
yeah, I totally need to see it.
I think you need to see it.
Completely hat stand. But then I know that you were not overly enamored with the film.
Well, let's say that I recommend reading Barbara. Also English translated and French translated, new edition. And then watch the film and let me know what you think.
Would you care to go deeper?
Oh.
Watch the film.
Watch the film. Well, there's one interesting thing. The photography is by Christopher Doyle.
Yeah, Christopher Doyle, who's famous for working
Walk Away.
in
So
Wong Kar-wai.
I was hoping to get some of the magic that he does to Hong Kong, to like nighttime Shinjuku. I have to say, it was a little bit of stereotypical, a lot of crows, a lot of
Well, that is
garbage.
that is
but it's
very
accurate.
Shinjuku. Let's be
Yes.
fair. Shinjuku, it is crows and garbage. I mean, and I love the place, of course, but crows and garbage. I mean, that's basically
Christopher, you nailed it.
In contrast to Shibuya, where it's garbage and rats.
Oh no, there are plenty of rats in Shinjuku as well. Trust me on that one. Okay, next up, Old Men Never Die, an Iranian film that was screening as part of the Asian Future section. Let me set the plot up for you guys. Aslan, a former hangman, has turned 100. He lives with other old people in a village where not a single person has died since Aslan moved there 45 years earlier. The residents are mostly old and physically impaired. The elderly villagers begin to think that suicide is the only way to escape their aching bodies. A small group of soldiers, meanwhile, is charged with preventing this from happening.
So is this Cocoon in Iran?
It is kind of. I mean, it is Cocoon-like in that you have a group of elderly people who are, rather than discovering the fountain of youth, they're trying to reclaim the right to disown their bodies.
So Maria, did you enjoy these old aging bodies?
This is director Reza Jamali's first feature film, but he made a short film with the same theme. It shows because the theme could be synthesized in 10 minutes, but it goes on for way long. So I enjoyed the beautiful vision, but at the same time, it really lacked to me a little bit of development.
So Marcus, is this any more than just a high concept?
Yeah, I think that Maria's absolutely right in that it doesn't really develop beyond the original idea. So the idea of having these men in a village all very familiar with each other, they've been sitting pretty much in the same room for a long, long time. That's a really interesting idea. And the idea of having soldiers who are trying desperately to stop these guys from throwing themselves off the local cliffs, that's also a lot of fun. But it doesn't really move on from the high concept, as you put it. Maria mentioned the visuals are very, very good, and you know, they really are stunning. There are some incredible telephoto shots of people standing on tops of mountains, these incredible wide shots of buses sort of journeying between the mountains on these ancient roads. The film does so much with its location and with its cinematography. So one of the things that I think you can really take away from the film is just the beauty of the location. In this case, it was shot in Azerbaijan, I believe. The mountains are incredibly beautiful. If it were a National Geographic cover shot, you would be like, fantastic, I've got to go there. At some point in my life, bucket list, I have to go and visit Azerbaijan. But as a story, the storytelling's kind of lacking.
Is this a comedy? Is it a satire?
It's a very light comedy. It has comedic moments. I think it's trying to be more than a comedy, but the strongest parts of the film are actually the scenes where the older men are competing to find ways to kill each other off.
I would have pushed harder on the comical side because, you know, thinking about old men, but they've been together for a long time, so it's almost like an odd couple on an extended version.
Exactly. There's this kind of waiting for Godot aspect to the film where these guys are just sitting around waiting for something to happen, but nothing ever happens. They're forced to start thinking about jumping off the local cliffs or drowning themselves simply because they've reached the end of their corporeal selves. They can't physically continue, yet they somehow do. There's a lot of comedic potential in the film. In one particular scene, one of the youngest of the old men proposes to a woman working at the local tea house. And then I think he's the youngest at like 90. But he goes to her father asking for her hand. Now, the father looks at him like, you got to be kidding me. It's funny, but there's probably more potential there.
So what is the director trying to say? Is this respectful to old people, or is he what kind of point is he trying to put across here?
I definitely think it's respectful to old people. I think what it's really doing is asking people to take value in what they have. These gentlemen are holed up in the village thinking if only we could get the angel of death to come and take us because we're just too tired. We can't do this anymore. But at some point, when they do realize that their time is limited, everything will change.
Particularly in Japan with its aging society and the respect that is paid to old people, how did the audience react to the film?
It's a great question. With respectful silence, I would say.
So this is the director's first film. Are you interested to see what he does next?
Absolutely. I mean, the film's full of these incredible visuals. He did win the Japan Foundation Best Asian Film. So, yes, I think that there's a lot of potential there in this director's next film.
Yeah, I really like directors that make these kind of high concept films, even if they don't necessarily work. Something like Ricky Gervais's first film, where no one can tell a lie. I forgot the name of the film, but I'm not sure it necessarily works as a film. But then it's very high concept, and then it gave him the space to go on and do other things.
Exactly, and I think that's the case here as well.
My name is Antonio Orejudo. I am the author of the novel in which the film The Advantages of Traveling by Train is based. And you are listening The Last Picture House.
From a film about old men that will never die to a film about buffets at funerals. Maria, could you set up food for a
Actually,
funeral?
it's not buffet, it's food for a funeral. And it's not necessarily connected to never dying villages. This film is set in drought-ridden northeastern Anatolia in the 1960s. We see young boy Mustafa is studying to become an ashik, which is a traditional musician, and he's traveling with his master, Zietin. So they go to a musical competition in Georgia, and Mustafa receives as a gift an apple, which is kind of a precious thing for someone who lives in high altitude where fruit trees don't grow. And he intends to keep that apple and give it to the girl he's in love with, but unfortunately it's promised to someone else. This because, as he has heard in a traditional song, giving this gift will change his fortune.
So is this a folk tale?
It is a folktale, yes. And we know from the director that it was set in the 1960s, but it's really timeless. It's a modern folktale, and the meaning of it was made clear by the director himself about the symbolism of the apple. Because the film starts with a scene way more modern time when two musicians find half-eaten apple in the lake, and it turns out that it's the apple that it's involved in his whole story. And we'll see that at the end as a circle.
You know me, Maria, I'm a sucker for a film with musicians in it. So what kind of role does music play in this film?
Music has a central role, and there's some very, very amazing traditional music. The Ashik tradition, which is this oral tradition, and it's partaken by Azerbaijan, Iran, and Turkey. And you see the performances of both the kids and the master, but also a female ashik from Georgia that sings in the film and is stunning.
From Georgia?
From Georgia, yes.
Okay, so this is something that extends across the entire region.
Yes, the director, Reis Selik, was very clear that he hates borders. So he wanted a story where the protagonist could come and go freely from Anatolia to Georgia, and this is practically one of his main messages for
And
this
they
film.
all share the same musical tradition.
They share the same musical traditions, and it's one really important scene when they go and because basically these asik are troubadour that entertain during like weddings or other kind of ceremonies. So they go to the wedding, which by the way is the wedding of the girl that Mustafa is in love with. And at one point, the groom is fed up with the traditional music and he said, "We want to dance, stop this music." So it's really kind of a shout out to the dying tradition and how it's important to be kept alive.
And how's this film shot? Is it documentary style, or are we looking at fantastical cinema, or?
I think it shares with the film we talked about before with All Men Never Die, this wonderful visionary cinema. So we see a lot of long shots with really astonishing panorama. And at the same time, the director doesn't believe in professional actors. He prefers to work with non-professionals, and he doesn't want to concentrate too much on their acting. So the acting sometimes it's not conducive to understand the action. It's way more about the landscape, about how this person is in the landscape.
So it's a visual storytelling
Yeah.
style rather than something that's driven by the actors.
Yeah, definitely. It's way more about big pieces of tableau, basically.
So most folk tales contain some kind of message or some kind of allegory. What kind of message do you think this has for contemporary society?
It was not immediately clear from the movie, but director said that for him, the apple, which is the most important symbol in this movie, is the beginning of life, and at the same time, we go back to Earth, which is the end of life.
Next up, Just 6.5, another film from Iran, this time playing in competition. The Tehran police are on the trail of Nasser Khakzad Navid Mohammadzadeh, a notorious drug dealer. When they finally manage to catch him, he tries to buy his way out of jail to avoid the death penalty and protect his family.
Now, this sounds like a bit of a departure from my image of Iranian cinema. So, what is this film, Marcus?
Well, when you think of Iranian cinema, you don't necessarily think of a kind of Michael Mann-inspired cops and robbers movie. Then along comes Just 6.5. The first 45 minutes of the film is really the police tracking down this gangster, and you see different strata of the society. You start low with the users, the meth users, and there's this incredible scene of people sitting in these kind of like giant pipes in this industrial wasteland. Some project has been abandoned, and there are whole families sitting around smoking meth inside the big sewer pipes that have been dumped on this site. The cops are gradually getting closer and closer and tracking down the main guy, the gangster. That's really where the film kicks in, because that gangster is really the main character for the film. But the first part of the film leads you to believe it's a police procedural, then it kind of flips and becomes about a man who's now desperate, willing to do anything to escape the death penalty.
So from Marcus's description, I'm getting kind of elements of Soderbergh's Traffic. What does this have to say about like drugs in Iran?
The country's next to Afghanistan, and one of the things that was pointed out in the Q&A by the director is that there is a lot of stuff coming in, and there's nothing they can ever really do to absolutely prevent that. The police are fighting a losing battle against drug use. And what's so interesting about this film is you see everybody being involved in this system. And for me, it's a great gangster movie in the sense that, like any Scorsese film, you see people at different levels of society being part of the problem, and different levels of the society trying to stop it or trying to prevent it. So you see families who are being sucked in, children being sucked in by their parents who are just trying to make ends meet, just trying to pay for the kid's schooling. The kid is then asked to take the rap for a deal by a father who, if he goes to prison, no one's going to be able to look after the kid anymore.
One of the most striking scenes was the police just breaks in a house of a possible dealer, and they search everywhere. They search everywhere, and the women, of course, are crying. And then they decide to just take them to the police. And then they have the dogs, and the dogs start attacking the women. So we understand that the women, they're hiding the drugs. And so you see immediately that the whole family, without any distinction, everybody at every level is involved. It's a family business.
So this is shot in Tehran, which is not famous for being the most free liberal society. How do you think they were able to get this film made?
My understanding is that in critiquing the drug trade and showing the impact that drugs have on society and on families in particular, that's how the filmmakers were able to make such a kind of hard-hitting and confronting film.
In putting the moral message very strongly in the second part. So we have kind of a division between the first part, which is a lot more like a police drama, and it tries to explain the mechanism of the crimes. The second part has the intention, the objective of being a moral lesson, and in the script is so evident. Every possible occasion for the detective to tell Nasser that he is ruining people's life. And we see that constantly.
You mentioned the script. This director's famous for his fast-paced dialogue. Do the actors manage to deliver it here?
Not only fast-paced, really shouty. So
it's very shouty.
Yes. So I was totally surprised when the actor Navid Mohammadzeh came to the Q&A, and he's such a soft-spoken.
He's incredibly charming.
I was totally smitten by this Middle Eastern star.
I could see that.
Yeah, I mean, he was like 1960s kind of star with his shades, and plus
he was playing very cool.
Came with this perfume of oud that we were totally immersed. I was starstruck.
I mean,
yes.
Those guys definitely had an aura. I mean, really, they had a certain degree of. He certainly had some star power.
And they were everywhere at the festival. I was there the next day or maybe 2 days later, and they were still hanging around, and people.
Yeah, they were very generous with the fans.
They were really nice, and that was one of the times I felt that community. We said earlier it's hard for Tokyo Film Festival to establish. When they were there, actually, because I could bump into them a few times and say hi, it was really nice. You referenced Michael Mann in your introduction, Marcus. Michael Mann's known for his spectacular set pieces. Does this director manage to do something similar?
Absolutely. The director, Saeed Rostai, he has an incredible visual style and he does these wonderful set pieces. We talked earlier about the one with the colony of people doing the meth thing inside these giant concrete pipes. These sewer pipes are stacked on top of one another. Another scene that was really notable for me was when dozens of prisoners are being hosed down by the drug dealer. The man who essentially sold the drugs is now in prison. He takes the hose from the bathroom and hoses everyone down like some kind of messianic character. So the film has these great images. The pacing, I think it's very intense. If anything, as Marie said, the dialogue's really, really hard, and therefore sometimes you kind of want a little bit of a relief. You want some moment to kind of like pull back and just sort of sit with the characters without everybody yelling at each other. But that's clearly this director's style. It's a really visceral film and it's a really energetic film. I'm really looking forward to seeing his next one.
Hello everybody, Last Picture House. I'm Nevia from Nevia Film, Virginia Picella.
Next, Maria, you're going to talk about an Italian film, Nevia.
Yes. Nevia is a 17-year-old girl living in a container park near Napoli. She lives with her grandma Nana, her aunt Lucia, and her little sister Enza. She will soon turn 18 and feels the pressure of her family to marry gangster Salvatore, who will provide her stability, they think. Nevia, though, wants to escape life in the gutter and wants her independence. She seems to find a new opportunity in a traveling circus where she starts working, taking care of the animals. When the police arrest her grandma, the two girls have to hide at Salvatore's house.
Okay, so this is like the genre of this film. It's a coming-of-age film, I guess.
It's a coming-of-age film, a coming-of-age for a girl in the South, where basically she starts being seen through the gaze of men. So she has to have a husband who protects her, and her life is kind of decided by others.
So there's a traditional structure kind of being imposed upon her. And we're talking about Napoli, like around there.
Yeah, which seems to be a little bit of a favorite of Tokyo Film Festival, because it's 3 years in a row that the representative for Italy is a story that takes place in the region of Napoli and in this kind of society where even the police doesn't go, lawless land. We saw that last year with the film called The Vice of Hope, with the same kind of protagonist, a struggling woman in this part of Italy.
So when I think of the South, I think of Dogman, the fantastic Garrone movie that came out, I think, earlier this year.
I mean, it's not a too far reference because the producer of this film is Matteo Garrone himself. I actually asked director Nunzia De Stefano how I was working with him, and she said he is the most wonderful producer. You never see him, she said. We have to note that this is the first time as a director. It's not that she did some short films, so this is the first thing that she has done.
But she worked on Gomorrah with Garrone, right?
Yeah, with Gomorrah, with all of Matteo Garrone's films.
As a writer?
She did a lot of things. So she was like assistant director, kind of a consultant, because Garrone is not from this region, but she is.
The new film, Nevia, is it kind of like a social realism?
This film follows more the protagonist, Nevia, with a kind of documentary style, but also very poetic. The scenes there are the most beautiful are the scenes with Nevia and her little sister, Enza. There's this one sequence where she puts her sister in kind of a cart that you usually would use for garbage or something, and they go around the city of Ponticelli, which is a small city around Napoli, having so much fun.
Pushing the shopping cart.
Pushing the shopping cart, yeah. It's a very beautiful scene. It finds beauty in the total decadence of the city.
So how were the performances in the film?
So we have a debuting actress here, Virginia Picella. The story is that she was a performance artist. She was doing some, I don't know if you guys know, the aerial silk.
It's like falling down from the ceiling attached to the curtains.
Yes, so it's hanging from a fabric.
You sound like somebody who knows, Iain. This is something you've experimented with in your free time?
Yeah, I have a multitude of hobbies.
So she was doing this performance in an old castle. She is a petite person, but she's very fierce. So she combines fragility and strength. And the casting director for the film was there, and she filmed it and sent it immediately to Nunzia De Stefano, and she decided to cast her, even though she had no previous experience as an actress.
So I believe that you sat down to talk with the lead actress, correct?
Yes, with Virginia Picella.
Let's take a listen.
So how was working for the first time in cinema as a protagonist?
And it was a wonderful experience. because I never wanted to be an actress in my life. And so it was like destiny that Nunzia found me when I was doing a performance, circus performance. On the set, we formed like a family, everybody, the troupe and the cast. It was wonderful. It was a sort of a magic between me and the director, because it's like I found myself in bigger. And she found herself in younger. So it was crazy, and there was a very deep feeling between us that you can see in the movie. And that's why it's so beautiful. And for me, for the first time, it was so not ashamed be in front of the camera, thanks to her, because she gave me, I trust her.
So, what was the most fun and the most difficult thing working on this film?
The most fun thing it was to work with the animals, the part of the circus, because every day it was like playing. And so I remember that I woke up thinking about the horse, the hippo. I wanted to see them, and so I woke up better. I went to the set and I had fun with all the animals, zebra, everybody. I love it. The most fun animal was the hippo. Pippo. In here it's called the Pippo. The most difficult thing was to open my emotions and my feelings in front of the camera. Before the movie, I was so a little closed kind of person, and for me it was difficult to show really myself in front of everybody. The people who will see the movie, because Nevia's story is also a little part of my story. When you have to show your really be, it's difficult for everybody, I think. But then I realized that do it saved me. Yeah, saved me, because I solved a lot of things looking these things by the eyes of Nevia. So it was a good thing.
One of the most anticipated films at the festival was Jojo Rabbit from director Taika Waititi. Iain, tell us the plot.
So we're in Germany, 1944. 11-year-old Jojo, played by Roman Griffin Davis, his first-time actor, is a devoted Nazi, a very devoted Nazi. So devoted, in fact, his imaginary best friend is Hitler himself, played by Taika Waititi. One day while attending a Hitler youth camp, Jojo was involved in a freak mishap while throwing a hand grenade, leaving him slightly disfigured. Forced to stay home and recuperate from these injuries, Jojo starts to hear noises coming from his mother's bedroom. When he goes upstairs to investigate, he is very shocked to discover a teenage Jewish girl, Elsa, played by Thomasin McKenzie, hiding behind the bedroom wall. Jojo must then confront his prejudices in order to protect those he loves.
So this is a film that we all saw, and it's a film that certainly split the audience response as well as the critics' response. Let's start with Maria. What were your thoughts of the film?
I went to the cinema with a very, very, very high expectation. I love Taika Waititi. He's the only person who was able to make me watch and love a Marvel film. I absolutely adore What We Do in the Shadows. For the film, let me say that it was a cinematographic puppy. It's very cute, adorable, but that's it.
That's your review.
Yes.
A cinematic puppy.
Yes. Very adorable. No one could hate it, but at the same time, you wouldn't put a puppy against a panther or a tiger.
Yeah, this is a really interesting film, and a lot of the reasons I think that it's had a mixed response from critics is because of the way it set itself up as an, quote, anti-hate satire, unquote. I think audiences going to the film expecting to have a Taika Waititi style comedy, they're going to be well satisfied. There are some great one-liners in the film. On the other hand, someone who's looking for perhaps something more biting, something more political, taking down the Nazis, I mean, the film doesn't really deliver on that front. It's much more sentimental, much more about the journey of the young characters, the naivety of the characters. It's got a strong heart and it's got a real sense of purpose, but at the same time, I don't really think that it serves itself well by saying that it's an anti-hate satire. That might be a nice way to frame it in the marketing, but it doesn't really work for audience expectations if you're expecting a satire.
I think I'm really lucky because both of you came into this, I think, with quite high expectations, and I came into it with quite low expectations, and I was really surprised by it. I really liked it. I found it very, very charming, and I found it funny. I generally laughed out loud quite a few times throughout the film, and it is a little bit broken, and it is a little bit awkward at times, and I think sometimes it's messy, but that didn't annoy me. I found it quite endearing.
No, I think that the awkwardness and the brokenness, it's something that Waititi does with all of his films. So, if you think to What We Do in the Shadows or Ragnarok, I mean, these are films that don't really follow the established pattern. Ragnarok, by no means was that a typical Marvel movie, and that's why it's so good, because yes, it's funny, but it touches on all of the beats that it needs to touch on in order to be a big spectacle. At the same time, it's about characters, it's about human beings, or in some cases gods, trying to figure out who they are. And here we have the same story. We have Jojo trying to figure out who he is in the face of these incredible forces. The overwhelming feeling that I got is that this film means well. It comes from a good place. I strongly believe that we need to have films that are about fascism, about indoctrination, about what can go horribly wrong in a good society, in a society full of nice people. I think that film is so important. Is this the film that really kind of opens it up? Does it tell us something that we don't already know? And I'm not really sure it does.
I didn't see it as a satire or anything actually. It's almost at points that the Nazis are inconsequential, because I saw it much more as a coming-of-age film for the boy. Now, the misstep that I think may have happened is the fact that they used the background of the Nazis, but once you sort of take that away, I really enjoyed this boy finding out his own way of thinking about the world and changing the way he feels.
Maria, what's your thought on this? Because I totally agree. I think that there's a great coming-of-age film there, and it's something that I think that Waititi does really, really well. But is this the right setting? Is this the right setup for that kind of story?
I think the context is probably too big, too dramatic. We're living in a time when my country, other parts in the world, the things of the past, of history, are devoid of all the tragicness of that real history and just used as some fashion, as some kind of movement.
It's a reference, isn't it? The thing with Nazis, it's become this kind of index to you're bad.
Yeah.
So if you say you're acting like the Nazis, you're a bad person. It's just become, it's real semiotics, isn't it? It's just like, it's a reference, but it doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
And the actual historical context of how a country full of people who were going about their daily lives suddenly turned into a place where everybody was for full war, for ultimate.
Yeah, so this kind of
destruction.
dynamic is not told. This is my personal belief, but everything starting from Chaplin playing the dictator to Life is Beautiful, or anything that wants to make fun and through making fun wants to give a lesson, are dangerous. You kind of normalize it. When you want to satirize something, you kind of make it, in a way, acceptable. So in this, I can also put...
I can't agree with that, because I don't think the film's in any way making the Nazis acceptable. I'm just saying that it doesn't fully explore the situation.
But Taika Waititi is making the Hitler character that we can laugh and tame. It's kind of the Alec Baldwin doing Trump.
I take your point in that. I mean, the reference I was going to make, thinking of those kind of like 1980s comedies, the whole thing with Hitler here is he's kind of somebody who could have walked out of Coming to America, or that kind of goofball John Landis comedy.
Yeah, but Taika Waititi plays him as a figure of fun, and isn't that the best way to puncture someone that would hate that, to have someone who's part Jewish playing him as just a laughable character? Isn't that a good way to take him down?
There's absolutely nothing wrong with Taika Waititi playing Hitler. That's not the issue for me. It's more that he doesn't show the whys and the hows of what was going on. It's more surface. It's more an easy reference without getting into detail.
It's almost like before showing how scary and wrong they are, it jumps off to say, no, but they're also nice Nazis. They were
There are a
nice.
lot of nice Nazis in this movie.
Yeah.
See, now I did read about this, and this is something that the New Yorker goes into quite a lot of detail in the article, and I disagreed with it. I don't think it's showing that there's nice Nazis. I think it's showing that at some point the humanity in yourself finally wins out. You realize the ridiculousness or the error of your choice in being so fundamentalist.
I think you can do that without setting in 1944 Germany. If you look into yourself and you question your choices, you're able to move beyond what everybody else is telling you to do. I wouldn't say it's tone deaf. I think that would be a bit of a stretch because I think Waititi's way too smart for walking into that. But it does feel like there are multiple films inside this film. Maybe that's something we should talk about because some of the performances feel like they're in one kind of film, other performances feel like they're from a much broader kind of comedic film.
That's one of the issues I did have with the film, was the juxtaposition of the very comic moments and then cutting to the very serious moments. I really didn't think, that was the bit where I didn't think it worked. That was the bit where I think the scenes themselves are played out very well. As you were saying, Marcus, they don't actually seem to be from the same film sometimes.
I think we have to talk about Scarlett Johansson's performance. She really did a great job, and it's certainly her best performance since Under the Skin for me. How about you guys?
I thought she was thoroughly charming. I don't know if it's her best performance, but it's the performance I've loved her in the most. I thought she was great. There was points where, again, talking about it being from different films, there's points where I think she was acting in a better movie than what we were watching. She was so good at playing playful and serious.
That's right. She was able to move between tones. She was doing the mother who's going to make everything beautiful and lovely because the world sucks outside. And then she was able to have those conversations with the girl that was living in the house and not knowing that, of course, her son was listening in.
And towards the end, with the scenes that she's not in, I think you miss that chameleon element to try and tie it together. I think when she's not there in certain scenes, it means that the move between the serious and the comedy really doesn't work quite so well.
That's an interesting point too. So this film comes from a long tradition of films about the death of innocents during wartime, and I'm thinking here of Empire of the Sun, the J.G. Ballard novel that was adapted by Steven Spielberg. In that film, Christian Bale spends much of the film alone. He meets up with John Malkovich's character who's leading him astray. And as an audience, you feel his loss, the fact that he's so alone. And and there are so many films that have done this. But I think that Jojo isn't allowed the opportunity to fully show his relationship with his mother beyond the montage of them on the bicycles. And there's sort of a beat missing there.
But while we're talking about performances, I think we also have to talk about Roman Griffiths Davis. This is his first film. And I think the interplay between him and Thomasin McKenzie, when they're trading banter, is brilliant. Their comic timing is great.
They're both fantastic, aren't they?
And I want to give a shout out to I don't know his name, but the actor, the young boy playing Yorkie. I think
he's hilarious.
So
I love him.
funny.
He also has the best comic timing,
Yeah.
I think, of everybody.
Yes.
Well, he reminds me of a young Nick Frost.
I hate to say this, but I thought the same thing.
And I also, on the performances, I do think that Rebel Wilson and Sam Rockwell are having a great time.
Sam Rockwell's character in the film is somebody who's come back, lost an eye, come back to Germany, and has realized that the war is going nowhere. He actually says, "We are losing the war, don't you get a kid?" Then he becomes this incredibly charismatic character, right?
And the chemistry between him and Alfie Allen, I think, is great as well.
Yeah.
I do know it's a very divisive film. I have friends that have absolutely loved it, and I have friends that really don't get on with it at all. I think this is really going to find its home as kind of a cult classic on DVD.
Iain, how important is truth to a good story?
Marcus, you know me, I'm never going to let the truth get in the way of a good pub story. And I don't mind a moment of embellishment, but I do think sometimes can be a bit tricky when you're telling something like we just talked about with Jojo Rabbit, a very important historical event. Then you do need to be a bit closer to the truth. But when you're doing something that is fantastical and silly and about the nature of truth itself, I don't think it's quite so necessary.
That is the perfect segue. Thank you, my friend. And the next film is Advantages of Traveling by Train.
Well, Marcus, let's see if you can do just as beautifully trying to explain the plot of what I understand is quite a complex
As your
film.
segue? Well, the plot is very complex, but I'll do my best. Literary agent Helga is forced to intern her husband in a psychiatric clinic. Boarding a train home, she meets one of the sanatorium psychiatrists, Augustin Sanguestin, who diagnoses patients through their writings, which he carries around in a red folder. He offers to tell her his life story, narrating 3 stories about one patient. But when Sanguestin gets off the train to buy a sandwich, the train sails off without him, leaving the folder in Helga's possession. It's a story of stories within stories, and it's all about unreliable narrators.
Is this as bizarre as the trailer suggests?
Absolutely, it's completely crazy.
Because it looks absolutely hat-stand by the trailer.
It is. This film, out of all of the films, turned out to be the big surprise. I mean, easily the big surprise of the festival, because it doesn't come from anywhere that you've been before. It's an incredibly inventive movie. It's a film that, if you like literature, if you like reading, and you love that kind of Calvino sense of being inside the book, you're going to enjoy it very much.
It really takes you to a roller coaster ride, both visually and both conceptually.
Yeah, because the trailer makes it look stunning.
It is stunning the whole way through.
Just to put it in context for you, this is a film that we were able to get P&I screenings for, so we went as press. After seeing the film, I immediately bought a ticket to see it again because I really had to see it again. It's that good a movie.
So you've explained a little bit about the plot very beautifully, Marcus.
Thank you very much.
He made me say that. Maria, can you give me a little bit more detail? Because I still don't really know what's going on.
Well, Marcus kind of skipped all the more grotesque, strong parts. But it's a movie that opens up with a woman finding a man dissecting his own feces. So it's not for faint of heart. But
that's true. That is actually the opening
But at the
concept.
same time, it shares the element of so many great movies, but keeping its originality. I'm thinking early Almodovar or filmmakers like Alex de la Iglesia. Also with the element of delicatessen, so the grotesque, the
there's
vivid
a lot of
colors.
Junet, there's Buñuel, there's a whole lot of stuff in here.
Yes. And I might add Strangers on the Train by Hitchcock. Because it's a story about you'd never know who you're going to meet on the train. It might take you to places that you really didn't want to go.
Well, on that note, we do have an interview, Maria.
We have an interview with the director, Aritz Moreno, and with the writer of the book this film is based on, Antonio Orejudo.
So I would like to ask you about the process of the movie. I know it's been a long process.
I received the novel for the first time like 5 years ago. My partner from my producer company, she read it first, and she enjoyed very much the book, but she thought it was impossible to make a movie from there. But she gave me the book like, you have to read this. It's really good, but I don't see a movie there. And when I read it, I see the movie clearly. Of course, it was like a crazy movie, but I love that. And then we start contacting with the editor and the author and that kind of thing, and try to get the rights.
The music is really incredible in this movie. So what was your relationship with the composer and any episodes in that?
Yeah, that was one of the main things I have very clear from the beginning. I love Cristobal's work. Cristobal, he born in Chile, but now he lives in Canada, and he made the soundtrack of Utopia. It's a British TV series that I love. In the process of working on this film, it was a very big reference for me, visually speaking and everything, and of course about the music. And I was sure he has to make the music. Cristobal has to make it. So it took me 3 years of write him emails and calls, emails during 3 years until I convinced him, and finally he did it.
How was having Antonio, the writer, on your side?
It was very easy because I didn't meet him until the film is almost over. So we talk. I don't know. We talk very little before the film, and we meet for the first time in the last week of the shooting. So I didn't have any pressure.
So this is a very original and very impactful debut. So it's going to be really in people's mind. Are you already working on something else?
Of course, this is what I like to do, but I I am aware that it's going to be really difficult to find something similar to this. So I know we are searching for next project and that kind of thing, but I know the next one is going to be worst. I'm sorry. I'm sure about that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The inspiration for this book.
Well, the inspiration, to tell you the truth, I don't remember my inspiration when I began to write this book, because I wrote it 20 or 22 years ago. So I was another person, very younger, very much younger. And I remember I was thinking or writing about an allegory of reading. What happened in our mind when we are reading, and this is the beginning of the novel, because the story, even in the novel or in the movie, is a woman who reads, a woman who listens. It's the same story, and a story inside another story, and it's an allegory of reading. And the problem of make confusion between characters and real people. That was the inspiration, I think.
What was your impression when you first saw the movie?
Something strange. I normally don't think in images or faces or characters. Well, in characters, yeah, but I think a writer thinks in terms of words. But when I finished, first time I saw the movie, I felt the impression, a very weird impression. I said to Aritz, I think I imagine all this stuff in the way you film it. So that's, I think, the best thing I can do. I can say about that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I guess this is a good place to mention the screenwriter, Javier Guillon, was also the screenwriter of Enemy by Denis Villeneuve. And I think this film is also one of those stories that's very difficult to adapt. I think Guillon does a great job of taking it and restructuring and making something that's visual.
What kind of visual style does the director use to kind of put this unfilmable book on screen?
Visually, the film owes a lot to those kind of European 1990s art house films, you know, the kind of Junet and Caro films, Delicatessen and later Amélie for Junet. It's a really rich kind of mise-en-scène with beautiful decor, but the camera work, it owes more to like Shaun of the Dead, something that's from Edgar Wright, where the camera's whip panning, picking up characters as they move through a scene. The visual storytelling style I love because it reinforces the narrative that's taking place. At any one time, there's someone telling a story, and the camera seems to be telling us part of the story given through voiceover, but it's not giving us the full story. And I like the way that the film kind of controls our perspective as an audience. The camera is offering us only so much in a way that an author, when telling a story, or when you in the pub are telling a story, and you're only giving the details you want us to know at any given time, you're controlling the rhythm, you're controlling the timing and what we know. You're withholding knowledge, and this film is all about that.
What I like about this movie is that you cannot trust anyone. You feel like you are investing your curiosity or you're investing your horror in some stories to discover 2 seconds later that it was just a make-believe. It was just something that someone came up with and it's not true. So I love the fact that I was always on my edge when I was watching this film.
So it does go back to Iain in the pub telling a story. It's like, should we believe it? Should we not believe it?
Oh, I gave up on that a long time ago.
So it's a shaggy dog story.
Absolutely.
Is this a comedy? Is this a drama? What kind of genre are we looking at here?
I think it's a grotesque satire, sarcastic. It's a farce.
Definitely sounds like me in the pub then.
Look, this film is certainly not for everyone. It's quite sick in a lot of places. But as a black comedy, I think it will find an audience, a kind of a cult audience. I recommend it to people. I hope a lot of people go out and see it. To wrap up this episode, what was your best film and your favorite film of this year's festival? Maria, starting with you.
Best film, I have to agree with the festival, Uncle. And my favorite film, Advantages of Traveling by Train.
Iain?
My best film, and I feel bad for saying this because I feel like Maria found it, and thank you so much for making me watch it, but yeah, I have to agree with Maria, it's Uncle. And my favorite has to be Cry. It's a post-rock movie, and who knew that I would fall in love with 75 minutes of silent pig farming?
I'm not surprised.
What about you, Marcus?
Best film of the festival, Disco. Favorite film? Absolutely Advantages of Traveling by Train. You've been listening to The Last Picture House. Be sure to let us know what you think of the show on Twitter, where we're at Last Pic House. Follow us on Facebook or on Instagram, where we're Last Picture House, one word. And we'll be back soon with our Christmas special. Thanks for listening.